In the scorching heat of southern Iraq, beneath layers of sand and the weight of millennia, archaeologists in the 19th century began uncovering something extraordinary. They had traveled to the region searching for the great cities mentioned in biblical texts, places like Babylon and Nineveh. But what they found was something even more ancient, more fundamental to human history than they could have imagined. They discovered evidence of a civilization so old that it predated Abraham, predated the Great Pyramids of Egypt, and existed thousands of years before Homer sang of Troy. This was Sumer, and its people were the Sumerians. These mysterious inhabitants of ancient Mesopotamia would prove to be the architects of what we recognize as civilization itself. Yet for centuries, nobody knew they had ever existed. Their cities had been swallowed by time, their language forgotten, their achievements attributed to peoples who came after them. The rediscovery of Sumerian civilization fundamentally changed our understanding of human history. Between roughly 4100 and 1750 BCE, the Sumerians flourished in the flat, marshy lands of southern Mesopotamia. They called their homeland simply the Land, or the Land of the Black-Headed People, a name that speaks to how they saw themselves. The name Sumer itself comes from the Akkadians, Semitic-speaking peoples who would later conquer them. But names matter less than what these people accomplished. In the span of a few thousand years, the Sumerians transformed human existence. They took scattered agricultural villages and forged them into bustling cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants. They invented writing, not to compose poetry at first, but to keep track of beer and grain. They developed mathematics, created the wheel, and established the first formal systems of law. They built towering temples that reached toward the heavens and organized society in ways that would echo through history. Southern Mesopotamia, located in what is now south-central Iraq, became home to Sumerian civilization during the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Ages between the 6th and 5th millennium BCE. The region's very name, Mesopotamia, comes from Greek and means between the rivers, referring to the Tigris and Euphrates. These two great waterways flow from the mountains of modern Turkey down through Syria and Iraq before emptying into the Persian Gulf. The land they traverse alternates between desert and fertile plain, between life-giving abundance and harsh, unforgiving wilderness. For the Sumerians, this geography presented both blessing and curse. Living along the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumerian farmers grew an abundance of grain and other crops, with surplus production enabling them to form urban settlements. The rivers deposited rich silt across the floodplains, creating some of the most fertile soil on Earth. Yet this same gift came with tremendous risk. The rivers flooded unpredictably, sometimes gently watering the fields, other times raging with destructive fury that could obliterate entire harvests and settlements. Unlike the Nile in Egypt, which flooded with reliable regularity, the Mesopotamian rivers were treacherous and capricious. The geography of southern Mesopotamia meant agriculture was possible only with irrigation and proper drainage. This necessity would shape Sumerian society in profound ways. Rainfall in the region was insufficient for reliable farming. The sun beat down mercilessly for much of the year, baking the earth until it cracked. Without human intervention, the land would have remained largely barren. The Sumerians had to learn to master water, to tame it, channel it, and make it serve their needs. Recent research suggests that the interaction of rivers, tides, and sediment deposits at the northern edge of the Persian Gulf shaped the development of Sumerian civilization. Between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Persian Gulf extended farther inland than it does today. Tides pushed fresh water twice daily far into the lower reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates. And early communities harnessed this dependable hydrology, using short canals to irrigate crops and date groves. This natural tidal irrigation may have enabled high-yield agriculture before humans developed more elaborate canal systems. The landscape itself was an obstacle course. Marshlands spread across much of the south, thick with reeds and teeming with fish, but difficult to traverse or build upon. There was almost no stone, no timber for construction, no metal ores to mine. Everything had to be imported or invented. Yet somehow, in this challenging environment, the Sumerians not only survived but thrived, building what many scholars consider the world's first true civilization. The origins of the Sumerian people remain shrouded in mystery and scholarly debate. A prehistoric people who lived in the region before the Sumerians have been termed the Ubaidians and are theorized to have been the first civilizing force in Sumer. These Ubaidians, whose actual name is unknown, drained marshes for agriculture, developed trade, and established industries including weaving, leatherwork, metalwork, masonry, and pottery. The history of Sumer spans through the 5th to 3rd millennia BCE in southern Mesopotamia, taken to include the prehistoric Ubaid and Uruk periods. The Ubaid period dates from about 5,300 to 4,700 BCE, based on carbon-14 dating of settlements in southern Mesopotamia. The archaeological record shows unbroken cultural continuity from these earliest settlements through the rise of recognizable Sumerian civilization. But were the Ubaidians themselves Sumerians, or did the Sumerians arrive later and build upon Ubaidian foundations? This question has puzzled historians for generations. Some scholars believe the Sumerians migrated to the region, possibly from the north, after perfecting irrigation agriculture elsewhere. Juris Zarins believes the Sumerians lived along the coast of eastern Arabia before it was flooded at the end of the Ice Age. Others have suggested the Caucasus region or even areas near the Caspian Sea as potential homelands. The Sumerians called themselves the Black-Headed Peoples and spoke a monosyllabic language unrelated to any other known language group, with their origins and relationship to other ethnic groups yet to be determined. What we know for certain is that by around 4000 BCE, the people we call Sumerians had established themselves firmly in southern Mesopotamia. They brought with them or developed a distinctive material culture, artistic styles, and most importantly, a way of organizing society that would set them apart. By 4000 BCE, the people known as the Sumerians were in control of the region. They began transforming scattered settlements into something unprecedented: true cities. The transition from village to city was neither sudden nor simple. It unfolded over centuries as populations grew, agricultural techniques improved, and social organization became increasingly complex. Small farming communities started clustering around religious centers. Surplus food production allowed some people to specialize in crafts other than agriculture. Priests, artisans, merchants, and administrators emerged as distinct classes. The temple became not just a place of worship, but an economic powerhouse, managing resources, organizing labor, and facilitating trade. Eridu is considered the first city founded by the Sumerians, located in present-day southern Iraq near the mouth of the Euphrates, close to the marshes. According to Sumerian mythology, kingship descended from heaven first to Eridu, making it sacred in their cosmology. Founded around 5400 BCE, Eridu was thought to have been created by the gods, who established order upon the earth, with Eridu as the starting point. The city was home to the great god Enki, lord of wisdom and fresh water, whose temple E-Abzu stood at the city's heart. Eridu developed at the integration of diverse population groups, fisher hunters, skilled in fishing and reed-based construction, the Sumera culture known for canal building and mud brick techniques, and nomads dwelling in semi-desert regions. This cultural melting pot fostered innovation and adaptation. Excavations at Eridu revealed that its temple underwent roughly 18 expansions over 4,500 years, each generation building atop the previous one, creating layers of history piled upon history. But it was Uruk that would become the crown jewel of early Sumerian civilization. Uruk played a leading role in the early urbanization of Sumer in the mid-4th millennium BCE. The strategic location of Uruk with vast arable land facilitated fast population growth, making it the most populous city at that time. By the final phase of the Uruk period around 3100 BCE, the city may have had 40,000 residents, with 80,000 to 90,000 people living in its environs, making it the largest urban area in the world at the time. Imagine walking through Uruk at its height. A massive wall, 9 kilometers in circumference, surrounded the city, a testament to both its wealth and the threats it faced. Within those walls, thousands of buildings crowded together, their mud brick walls gleaming in the sun. The streets bustled with merchants, farmers bringing produce to market, craftsmen plying their trades, priests in elaborate robes, and scribes carrying clay tablets. The air filled with sounds, sellers hawking wares, animals bleating and braying, children playing, and from the great temple complex, the sounds of ritual and ceremony. Uruk was home to multiple temples, such as the Temple of Inanna, goddess of love and war, and the Temple of Anu, god of sky. These weren't merely places of worship. They were economic engines, employing hundreds or thousands of people, storing grain and goods, financing trade expeditions, and essentially functioning as the city's central bank and administrative headquarters combined. Other major Sumerian city-states included Ur, Nippur, Lagash, Kish, and others, each surrounded by a wall with villages settled just outside and distinguished by the worship of local deities. Ur, located on the Euphrates, grew wealthy through trade and became a center of moon god worship. Nippur held special religious significance as the cult center of Enlil, chief of the gods, making it a neutral ground where rival city-states could meet and negotiate. Each city developed its own character, its own patron deity, its own traditions. Yet they shared a common Sumerian culture, language, and worldview. City-states typically centered around a ziggurat, a massive stepped temple dedicated to the city's patron deity, which served as the religious, political, and economic hub. These ziggurats were architectural marvels, built from millions of mud bricks, often stamped with the name of the king who commissioned them. They rose in tiers toward the sky. At the top sat a shrine where the god was believed to dwell. Priests would climb the steep stairs to perform rituals, to present offerings, to seek divine guidance for the city. For ordinary Sumerians looking up at these towers, they must have seemed like mountains, like bridges between earth and heaven. Of all Sumerian innovations, perhaps none was more revolutionary than writing. The Sumerians were responsible for the invention of writing, and the world's earliest known texts come from the Sumerian cities of Uruk and Jemdet-Nazar, dating to between about 3350 and 2500 BCE. Following a period of proto-writing from about 4000 to 2500 BCE. This wasn't writing as we might imagine it, not poetry or philosophy or history. It was something far more practical and, in its way, more revolutionary. Like 2800 BCE, Sumerians were using written communication to keep record of goods they were making and trading, with the earliest records being simply numbers and commodities rather than great works of prose. Imagine a temple administrator faced with managing vast stores of grain, tracking loans, recording offerings, and organizing labor. Memory alone couldn't suffice. Simple counting tokens had served for a while, but as cities grew and economic life became more complex, a more sophisticated system was needed. Initially, pictographs were used, which were essentially drawings of different objects. A picture of a bull meant a bull. A picture of grain meant grain. Simple enough. But how do you draw give or receive or owe? How do you indicate quantities, qualities, or abstract concepts? The Sumerians solved this by letting symbols represent not just objects, but sounds and ideas. Scribes used sharpened reeds to scratch symbols into wet clay, which dried to form tablets. And this writing system became known as cuneiform. The term cuneiform comes from Latin and means wedge-shaped, describing the distinctive marks made by pressing the reed stylus into clay at angles. Developed between 3500 and 3000 BCE, cuneiform script was the first writing system developed by the Sumerians. What began as simple pictures evolved into a complex system with hundreds of signs, some representing objects, others representing syllables or sounds. Learning to read and write cuneiform required years of training. Schools were common in Sumerian culture, marking the world's first mass effort to pass along knowledge in order to keep a society running and building on itself. Young scribes, almost always boys from wealthy families, would spend their days copying texts, memorizing sign lists, and practicing their craft. It was tedious work, but it opened doors to prestige and power. Scribes became essential to every institution, from temples to palaces to merchant houses. As cuneiform became more sophisticated, it was used to record laws, recipes, prayers, hymns, stories, legends, and epics such as the Tale of Gilgamesh. Writing transformed from a mere accounting tool into a vehicle for literature, for preserving history, for exploring the human condition. Sumerians left behind scores of written records, and they are renowned for their epic poetry, which influenced later works in Greece and Rome and sections of the Bible. Most notably, the story of the Great Flood, the Garden of Eden, and the Tower of Babel. The invention of writing changed everything. It allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations. It made complex administration possible. It preserved laws, ensuring they could be referenced and enforced consistently. It recorded myths and legends, keeping them from being lost or distorted through oral transmission. In a very real sense, writing made civilization as we know it possible. But writing was just one of many Sumerian innovations that would shape human history for millennia to come. The Sumerians figured out how to collect and channel the overflow of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and the rich silt it contained, then use it to water and fertilize their farm fields. They designed complex systems of canals, with dams constructed of reeds, palm trunks, and mud, whose gates could be opened or closed to regulate water flow. This mastery of irrigation was no small feat. It required sophisticated understanding of hydraulics, coordinated labor, constant maintenance, and centralized authority to manage water rights and resolve disputes. Wooden plows replaced animal horns and sticks, greatly increasing agricultural efficiency and productivity, allowing Sumerians to secure stable food supplies for their cities and store excess food in granaries. With reliable irrigation and improved plows, Sumerian farmers could produce far more than their families needed, creating the surplus that supported craftsmen, priests, soldiers, and administrators. The wheel was invented around 3500 BCE for the production of ceramics, serving as the first potter's wheel, and only later came to be used for transportation. The earliest evidence of the wheel's use dates to around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamian archaeological sites. Think about what life would be like without wheels. Every heavy load would need to be dragged, carried, or loaded onto a sledge. The invention of the wheel revolutionized not just pottery production, but eventually trade, warfare, and the movement of goods and people across vast distances. The Sumerians didn't invent wheeled vehicles, but they probably developed the first two-wheeled chariot in which a driver drove a team of animals. These early chariots, used in ceremonies and by the military, gave Sumerian city-states significant advantages in conflicts with neighboring peoples. The chariot would eventually spread across the ancient world, transforming warfare and transportation wherever it went. The Sumerians developed a formal numbering system based on units of 60, known as the sexagesimal system. This system developed out of necessity to create trade and taxation policies and to track the night sky for preparing lunar calendars. Why base 60? Scholars believe it may relate to the fact that 60 can be divided evenly by many numbers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made calculations easier in a world without calculators. The Sumerians divided a day into 12 hours of light and 12 of darkness, then further divided these into 60-minute hours. Every time we check a clock, we're using Sumerian mathematics. They gave us the 60-second minute, the 60-minute hour, and the 360-degree circle. The Pythagorean theorem was in use millennia before Pythagoras lived. Sumerian mathematics was remarkably sophisticated, used in surveying land, calculating areas, managing resources, and astronomical observations. The Sumerians were the first astronomers to map the stars into separate constellations and identified the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. They charted the movements of celestial bodies for practical and religious purposes, using astrological symbols to predict events and tracking lunar phases to create their calendar. Their astronomical knowledge would be inherited and expanded by later Mesopotamian civilizations, eventually influencing Greek and Islamic astronomy. Sumerian society was hierarchical, with clear distinctions between classes. At the top sat the king, often called the Lugal, meaning big man. Initially, these may have been temporary war leaders, chosen in times of crisis, but over time, the position became hereditary. Priest kings, believed to be representatives of the gods, held significant authority and were responsible for maintaining the favor of the deities. Below the king were the priests, who wielded enormous power. They managed the great temples, which weren't just religious centers, but economic powerhouses controlling vast lands, workshops, and trade networks. The priests performed rituals, interpreted omens, and claimed to communicate with the gods. In a society where divine favor meant everything, where a bad harvest or military defeat might signal the gods' displeasure, the priests held life and death power over policy and people. Scribes formed another elite class. Literacy was rare and valuable. Scribes were essential to every institution, maintaining records and facilitating administration. They recorded legal transactions, copied religious texts, kept accounts, drafted contracts, and wrote letters. Their skills made them indispensable, and many rose to positions of significant influence. Below these elite groups came merchants and craftsmen. Merchants organized caravans, negotiated deals, imported exotic goods from distant lands, and grew wealthy through trade. Craftsmen specialized in various trades: metalworking, pottery, weaving, carpentry, jewelry making, and more. The finest artisans gained renown for their work, and their products were prized throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. Most Sumerians, however, were farmers. They worked the fields, maintained the irrigation canals, paid taxes in grain or labor, and served in the city's militia when needed. Their lives were hard, dictated by the seasons, the floods, and the demands of temple and palace. Yet they weren't necessarily impoverished. A skilled farmer with good land could live comfortably, even prosper. At the bottom of society were slaves. Though slavery in Sumer wasn't quite like the chattel slavery of later periods. Some slaves were prisoners of war. Others were criminals, or people who had sold themselves to pay debts. Slaves could sometimes own property, conduct business, and even buy their freedom. Still, they were property, subject to their owner's whims, and their lives were undoubtedly difficult. Marriage was an important institution in Sumerian society, with arranged marriages being common and serving to strengthen social and political alliances between families. Families were typically extended, with multiple generations living and working together. Children, especially sons, were highly valued for carrying on the family name and inheriting property. The major deities in the Sumerian pantheon included An, the god of the heavens; Enlil, the god of wind and storm; Enki, the god of water and human culture; Ninhursag, the goddess of fertility and the earth; Utu, the god of the sun and justice; and Nanna, the god of the moon. These gods weren't distant, abstract forces. The Sumerians imagined them as beings much like humans, with emotions, desires, conflicts, and relationships. They ate and drank, married and had children, quarreled and made peace. Enlil was represented by the symbol of a horned cap and was associated with the number 50, considered sacred to him. He was the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon and the patron deity of the city of Nippur. Enlil was powerful, but also dangerous. In Sumerian flood myths, it's Enlil who grows annoyed by the noise of humanity and decides to wipe them out with a great deluge. He represented the awesome, terrifying power of nature itself. Enki was the Sumerian god of wisdom, fresh water, intelligence, trickery and mischief, crafts, magic, healing, creation, virility, and fertility. He resided in the ocean underneath the earth called the Abzu, which was an important place in Mesopotamian cosmic geography. Enki was clever, often too clever for his own good. He was the patron and creator of humanity in many myths. When Enlil wanted to destroy humanity with a flood, it was Enki who warned a righteous man to build a boat and save himself, his family, and representatives of animal life. Inanna was the Sumerian goddess of love, sexuality, prostitution, and war. She was the divine personification of the planet Venus, the morning and evening star, and her main cult center was the Inanna temple in Uruk. Inanna was passionate, fierce, and unpredictable. Her myths are among the most numerous and compelling in Sumerian literature. In one famous story, she descends to the underworld to confront her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. She's killed, but eventually rescued through Enki's intervention, though her husband Dumuzi must take her place in the underworld for part of each year, explaining the cycle of the seasons. The Sumerians had more myths about Inanna than any other deity, and many of these myths involved her attempts to usurp control of other deities' domains. In one tale, she visits Enki in Eridu and through a drinking contest, tricks him into giving her the me, the divine laws and powers that govern civilization. Drunk and generous, Enki hands them over, but when he sobers up and realizes what he's done, he tries to get them back. Inanna escapes to Uruk with her prizes, and Enki must reluctantly accept the situation. This myth may reflect the historical shift of power from Eridu to Uruk as the dominant city. The Sumerians believed that gods required constant care and attention. They needed to be housed in proper temples, fed with offerings, entertained with music and ritual. In return, the gods would protect the city, ensure good harvests, grant victory in war, and maintain cosmic order. Anger the gods, and disaster would follow. The relationship was reciprocal, but also fraught with anxiety. The gods' motives weren't always clear. Their favor couldn't be taken for granted, and catastrophes might strike for reasons beyond mortal comprehension. The Sumerians didn't establish an empire like the Romans did, but lived in a group of independent city-states like the Greeks. These city-states battled each other, with strong rulers conquering their neighbors while weak rulers were defeated. And different city-states such as Lagash, Uruk, and Ur were dominant at different times. The Sumerian king list, a remarkable document compiled much later, but drawing on earlier sources, attempted to chronicle the succession of kings from the time kingship descended from heaven. It lists impossibly long reigns for early rulers, sometimes tens of thousands of years, suggesting these early portions were mythological rather than historical. But as the list progresses, the reign lengths become more plausible, and many of the later kings are confirmed by contemporary inscriptions. The most famous of early Sumerian rulers is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, who took control around 2700 BCE and is still remembered for his fictional adventures in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first epic poem in history. Gilgamesh was likely a real king, but legends grew around him until he became a superhero figure, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, their adventures together, Enkidu's death, and Gilgamesh's desperate quest for immortality. It explores themes of friendship, mortality, the meaning of life, and the relationship between civilization and nature. This ancient story influenced countless later works, including parts of the Hebrew Bible. Wars between city-states were frequent, but often limited in scope. A conflict might arise over water rights, borders, or trade routes. Armies would march out, a battle would be fought, and one side would prevail. The victor might demand tribute, impose a puppet ruler, or annex territory. But complete destruction of defeated cities was rare. After all, these were closely related peoples, sharing language, culture, and often family connections. Total war was economically destructive and culturally abhorrent. Still, rivalries could be fierce and long-lasting. The cities of Lagash and Umma fought for generations over a disputed border region. Inscriptions record their conflicts, with each side claiming divine sanction and righteous cause. Eventually, powerful rulers would attempt to unite multiple cities under their control, creating the first Mesopotamian empires. But during the height of Sumerian independence, the city-state remained the basic political unit. The Sumerians didn't live in isolation. Lapis lazuli probably originated in northern Afghanistan, requiring transport across the Iranian plateau to Mesopotamia and then Egypt. Several Indus seals with Harappan script have been found in Mesopotamia, particularly in Ur, Babylon, and Kish, and various inscriptions mention the presence of Meluha traders and interpreters in Mesopotamia. This suggests extensive trade networks reaching from the Indus Valley in modern Pakistan to the eastern Mediterranean. Sumerian merchants were adventurous and ambitious. They organized caravans that traveled overland through dangerous territories, crossing deserts and mountains. They built ships and sailed down the Persian Gulf to trade with distant peoples. They established trading colonies in strategic locations. In return for Mesopotamian grain, textiles, and manufactured goods, they imported timber from Lebanon, copper from Oman, tin from Afghanistan, precious stones from Iran and Afghanistan, gold from Egypt, and countless other goods. This trade enriched Sumerian cities, but also spread Sumerian culture. Cuneiform writing was adopted by neighboring peoples and adapted to write their languages. Sumerian art styles influenced craftsmen across the Near East. Religious concepts, mythological themes, and scientific knowledge circulated along trade routes. In this way, Sumerian achievements became the foundation for all subsequent Near Eastern civilizations. The Sumerians progressively lost control to Semitic states from the northwest, and Sumer was conquered by the Semitic-speaking kings of the Akkadian Empire around 2270 BCE. Sargon of Akkad, whose past is shrouded in legend, rose to power and built the city of Agade as his base. Sargon was ambitious and ruthless. He conquered the Sumerian city-states one by one, creating the first true empire in Mesopotamian history. His army is considered the first organized standing army in history and the earliest to use chariots in warfare. Under Akkadian rule, many in the region became bilingual in both Sumerian and Akkadian. Sumerian remained important for religious and scholarly purposes, much as Latin would later in medieval Europe. Toward the end of the empire, Sumerian became increasingly a literary language. The living, spoken Sumerian language was gradually replaced by Akkadian in daily life, though it never completely died out in written form. The Akkadian Empire itself eventually collapsed, invaded by mountain peoples and torn by internal conflicts. There was a brief Sumerian renaissance under the third dynasty of Ur, when Sumerian kings once again ruled over Mesopotamia. This period saw remarkable cultural achievements, with temples rebuilt, literature compiled, and laws codified. But it was a last flowering. By 2000 BCE, Sumer as a distinct political entity was finished, absorbed into the broader Mesopotamian world. Yet Sumerian influence endured. Sumerian influence on Babylonia and all subsequent cultures in the region was undeniably great. The Babylonians, Assyrians, and other peoples who followed all built upon Sumerian foundations. They used cuneiform writing, worshipped gods with Sumerian origins, employed Sumerian mathematical systems, and studied Sumerian literature. Scribes in Babylon, more than 1,000 years after the fall of Sumer, still copied Sumerian texts and learned the ancient language as part of their education. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the most famous legal documents from antiquity, drew heavily on earlier Sumerian legal traditions. The Epic of Gilgamesh was retold in Akkadian and other languages, spreading across the ancient world. Sumerian flood myths influenced the biblical story of Noah. The concept of the ziggurat, the great stepped temple, continued in Babylon and beyond. Even the 7-day week, though developed later, has roots in Sumerian astronomical and mathematical traditions. When we consider what the Sumerians accomplished, the magnitude of their achievement becomes staggering. They took humanity from scattered agricultural villages to complex urban civilization in just a few thousand years. They invented writing, giving humanity the ability to record, preserve, and transmit knowledge across generations. They developed mathematics that we still use today, every time we tell time or measure angles. They created literature that explores timeless human themes, stories that still resonate 5,000 years later. The Sumerians established legal systems, organized religion, sophisticated agriculture, and international trade. They built monumental architecture that inspired awe and demonstrated what organized human effort could accomplish. They developed art, music, and poetry. They studied the stars, tracked time, and tried to understand the cosmos and humanity's place within it. They grappled with questions of mortality, justice, love, and meaning that still occupy us today. In many ways, the modern world is unthinkable without Sumerian innovations. Our writing systems, though vastly different from cuneiform, serve the same purposes the Sumerians first recognized: recording transactions, preserving laws, telling stories, and expressing ideas. Our cities, though incomparably larger and more complex, still serve the same functions, bringing people together for mutual benefit, facilitating trade and specialization, and creating centers of culture and learning. Our governments, religions, and social structures all have roots that trace back, however indirectly, to Sumerian precedents. The rediscovery of Sumer in the 19th and 20th centuries fundamentally changed how we understand human history. Before archaeologists began excavating Mesopotamian sites and deciphering cuneiform texts, the ancient world seemed to begin with Egypt and the biblical patriarchs. Suddenly, we realized that civilization was far older and more complex than previously imagined. The Sumerians showed us that the fundamental innovations that define civilization, writing, cities, complex government, organized religion, and sophisticated culture, emerged not gradually over many millennia, but relatively rapidly in a single region. The Sumerians were not superhuman or divinely inspired, despite what their own myths sometimes claimed. They were people like us, facing challenges, solving problems, making mistakes, and occasionally achieving greatness. They worried about harvests and floods, about enemies at the gates, about pleasing the gods and securing their own futures. They fell in love, raised families, pursued ambitions, and eventually died, just as all humans do. Yet collectively, over generations, they transformed human existence in ways that still shape our world. Walking through a museum today and seeing a Sumerian clay tablet covered in cuneiform, or a cylinder seal carved with intricate images, or a statue of a worshiper with hands clasped in eternal prayer, we're looking at the handiwork of our civilization's pioneers. These weren't primitive people stumbling towards sophistication. They were intelligent, creative, ambitious individuals who saw problems and invented solutions, who imagined possibilities and made them real, who built something unprecedented and, in doing so, showed humanity what it could become. If you've enjoyed learning about the Sumerians and their revolutionary contributions to human civilization, please give this video a like and subscribe to History Scrolls for more deep explorations into the ancient world. Hit the notification bell so you never miss new content about the fascinating peoples and cultures that shaped our world. Share this video with anyone interested in history, archaeology, or the origins of civilization. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep scrolling through history.